Welcome to all. This is the last workshop in the 2025 New York State World Languages Professional Learning Series. My name is Candice Black, and I am your World Language Associate in the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages of the New York State Education Department. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Preparing Teacher Candidates for Professional Success, the World Languages Methods course. A rich, sharply focused, and practical world languages methods course can equip teacher candidates with the knowledge and skills for success in their clinical experiences and beyond. This webinar is designed to inform world language methods course instructors in undergraduate and graduate programs about the abundance of resources available from NYSED OBEWL to support their instruction, particularly as it relates to preparing candidates to apply the revised New York State Learning Standards for World Languages. Presenters will familiarize participants with the abundance of resources available on the NYSED OBEWL World Languages website and will share sample instructional and assessment tasks. Participants will consider ways to meaningfully integrate these resources in light of the goals and priorities of their methods course. Our webinar presenters today are Dr. Joanne O'Toole, Bill Heller, and Dr. Lori Langer de Ramirez. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Joanne, Bill, and Lori to begin this webinar.
Thank you, Candy, and thank you to everyone who's here for joining us today. So again, preparing teacher candidates for professional success. So before we get started, let's make sure that you know about our Spring 2026 professional learning opportunities, that they're not yet published, but we will be announcing them in very early January 2026. And we have a very robust selection of professional learning opportunities. They'll continue to be on Tuesdays from 4 to 5 p.m., so keep that time slot open. In the meantime, we invite you to go back to our many recorded webinars. They're available to you any day, anytime, anywhere, and in your pajamas. So those are available on our NYSED OBEWL website. Our webinar symbol key is the same as always. We ask that you keep that microphone muted. There may be times we ask you to think alone, and you'll see that thought bubble. Writing in the chat box is reserved for the conclusion of the webinar, and we do have a few things in the Google folder, the handouts folder. You will see that folder icon in the corner of those slides, and as Candy said, Bill will put the PDF of these slides in the folder at the conclusion of today's webinar. So we have two goals for today. The first, I can identify NYSED OBEWL resources to use in the methods class and beyond for developing future and current teachers' knowledge and skills. And second, I can identify ways to model discipline-specific strategies for developing future and current teachers' knowledge of the standards and skills in applying them. So when thinking about designing a methods course, there are two key considerations. First, what should pre-service world language teachers know, and what should they be able to do? And so the first consideration related to those two questions are the course outcomes. That's actually where I'll start this webinar, thinking about what informs course outcomes. And then the questions, what instruction and learning tasks best promote learning, and what resources best support learning, brings us to our second big point, which is course and lesson design. And that will be the primary focus of today's webinar. So there's a lot of guidance out there. And first off, there's both national and state guidance about what pre-service teachers should know and be able to do. This guidance is not world language specific. At the national level, we have the INTASC Model Core Teaching Standards and learning progressions for teachers. This is what any teacher in the US in any field should be able to do. At the state level, we have New York State teaching standards, as well as the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. Again, what every teacher in New York State in any content area should do relative to the state's priorities. But in addition to that general guidance, we have world language specific guidance. At the national level, you'll see that we have the ACTFL CAPE program standards for the preparation of foreign language teachers. Now, there's a little asterisk there because at the November ACTFL convention, they announced that these have been revised and updated. Foreign language will be gone. It will be replaced with world language, but we haven't seen them yet. So forthcoming. And you can see that that's specific to programs, teacher education programs. Then we have the ACTFL proficiency guidelines and ACTFL guiding principles, which are again about what world language teachers should know and be able to do. And we have the world readiness standards for learning languages, which we know is about what world language learners should be able to do. Well, first of all, our pre-service teachers are also learners of the language. So this is what they should be able to do as students of the language. But whenever we look at learning standards, there are implications for what it means for our teaching. And then we can move to our New York State guidance. And where we start is with a content specialty test. So this is one of those teacher certification exams that candidates take. They take it in the language in which they're choosing to be certified to teach. And through it, they demonstrate their own language capacity in terms of the modes of communication, but also the fifth part of this five-part assessment is their ability to write a lesson plan using the standards. But in addition to that pre-service test, or teacher certification exam, we have the guidance from NYSED OBEWL, our learning standards, our themes and topics, our performance proficiency targets, and performance indicators. And again, although this is about what our students should be able to do, it also implies what teachers should know and be able to promote in their students' learning. And we wouldn't be complete without thinking about the research and theory. So two big areas of research and theory that inform the methods course, the high leverage teaching practices. There are actually two books, but the first one is world language specific, and it draws on what the research and theory say best promotes learning in the world language field. It aligns beautifully with our standards. Instructed second language acquisition is informing how we teach in a classroom in research and theoretically informed practices. So to kind of summarize all of that, we start with the research and theory. The research and theory is what informed our national guidance and its development. The research and theory, along with the national guidance, informed, and it continues to inform, our state guidance. And it's all of this together that informs what we do in our methods course. One of the things that you will find in our handouts folder is the methods course resource packet. Every semester, we reach out to everyone who teaches a methods course that we're aware of. So if by any chance you teach a methods course and you haven't gotten an email from us, reach out. You can email Candy, you can email me, because we provide this document. So let's take a look at what its table of contents are. We take topics that are typically taught in a methods course, and you can see every one of them listed here, and then we link all of the webinars and all of the resources that go along with these topics so that people who are teaching a world language methods course can bring these resources to their students, to their methods class. So, coming to know and be able to do the work of world language teaching, it's important to understand that it is developmental. Where it starts is with no understanding of the work of world language teaching or inaccurate understanding. And you may wonder, why would that be? Well, it depends on our pre-service teachers' prior learning experiences. Was their experience as a learner one that was standards-based or reflective of the standards? Or did they take courses at the college that were taught around education, but not by people who know our field, who may actually have taught something that isn't aligned to our field? They may come, or we may simply start developing their conceptual understanding. And we know that's our starting place. And then over time and with guided practice, they're going to be able to enact those understandings, put them into practice. And by the time they're concluding their methods courses and as they're in student teaching, they're going to be able to enact independently what they have learned over time, although it will be somewhat uneven. It's what the state often refers to as the beginning teacher. So there's some unevenness to be expected. And because it's with time and practice that they will develop the greater capacity. So what Bill and I are going to do, and then Lori will follow up with a different perspective, is give you a peek at two approaches to teaching the methods course. You may already be aware that I teach the Modern Language Methods course at SUNY Oswego, and Bill teaches it at SUNY Geneseo. So what you have a snapshot here of is the 14-week fall semester methods course summary overview for the course I teach. You can see I get 14 weeks with people who are preparing to be world language teachers to teach them everything that they should know and be able to do. That's not actually quite right because I also have the gift of supervising their student teaching. So I tell them that's your individualized methods course. But you can take a look at this when you have a time later on and notice like the range of topics that we cover. Now, for space, I didn't repeat how many times I come back from class to class, some of the same topics to build it out further and reinforce it. But I did bold the HLTP, that's the high leverage teaching practice, because I use the high leverage teaching practices as kind of a frame to my course. Again, they map on so nicely to our world language standards that it's a frame through which I can teach the standards well. So what's the coursework that my students bring to the methods course, and what are they taking alongside of it? Well, again, I have undergraduates and graduates, so this is a peek at my undergraduates program. We have what are called blocks. It's the 4 final semesters of an undergraduate program. And so they take the Modern Language Methods course in block 3, typically the fall semester of the senior year, and the semester prior to student teaching in block 4. Blocks 1 and 2, which are typically the fall and spring of the junior year, they take courses in schooling, pedagogy, and social justice, teaching literacy in the content areas, interdisciplinary methods, adolescence literacy, assessment and intervention, educational planning for students with disabilities, and they have 2 field experiences. So one of the things I've done is put in blue what they're doing that is world language specific. So those field experiences are in language classrooms. And then block 3, when they're taking the methods course, they're also taking culturally relevant teaching, and they have a 2-day-a-week field experience in the classroom that typically becomes their student teaching placement in the spring semester. It looks a bit different in our graduate program because our graduate program is what's called a residency, and the entire program is 3 semesters in length. They bring all of their linguistic knowledge. They take no language courses. They just take the courses needed for the master's degree and certification. They start, they take the Modern Language Methods course in the second of the 3 semesters because they start in the summer, taking inquiry into educational foundations, literacy in the disciplines, teaching English language learners across the curriculum, and interdisciplinary methods, grades 7 through 12. In the semester when they take the methods course, they're also taking an adolescence literacy course, and they have a 5-day-a-week field experience for the first 7 weeks and a 5-day-a-week student teaching experience for the next 7 weeks. So you can see just how incredibly intense this is. And finally, in that 3rd semester, they take their special education course, teaching exceptional students, and 5 days a week, they're in the classroom. The first of those 2 quarters, quarter 3, is a field experience, and quarter 4 is student teaching. So what Bill and I will both do is show you what we refer to as the critical lens. What are some of those underlying principles or priorities that inform how we design our methods course and the tasks that we have our learners do? Mine is really about building conceptual understandings, and it's a 3-part model. First, we're better together. Secondly, process and processing matter. And finally, depth over breadth. So let's see what each of these means. We're better together by interacting and enacting course concepts collaboratively. My poor kiddos, they don't get a minute to work alone. We do everything together. Yeah, they do get a minute, but not much more. We're better together by creating class models and resource sets. And we're better together by joining and participating in the world language profession. Second, that process or processing matters. Through the use of multimodal and multi-step modeling. Through access to and regular use of an organized set of professional resources. And through the drafting and peer feedback processes. And finally, through the use of self-assessment tools and reflection. I want to share with you that organized set of professional resources. So Bill, I'll have you forward that. Thank you. So I found these wonderful pocket organizers, 12 pockets. And what I did with this is I added both a cover page and a table of contents. And I put in your folder my table of contents. And why I wanted you to be able to look at it closely, because I know this font is way too small, is how I organize the documents, most of which come right from our New York State OBEWL resources for world language education. Some of them you'll see are things that I created and I've added that haven't yet been added to the state ed resources. But it might give you a way if you teach the methods course, to think about organizing the resources. It might also be a way, if you're just a teacher who's here out of curiosity, to organize the many resources you've collected over time. My students know if we go to tab 3, we are looking at authentic resources. If we're at tab 7, we're looking at strategies. They know their tabs inside out because we look at these all the time. And finally, depth over breadth. Through experiential learning and through ongoing revisitation of core concepts and resources. So what I'm going to do now is show you 4 different areas where I built my students' conceptual understandings. And I'm going to show you how those 3 core ideas related to my critical lens inform how I move my learners to develop conceptual understandings. So the first one I want to look at is about the New York State Learning Standards for World Languages. And in this case, that they identify what learners should know and be able to do. And you can, of course, see the standards image over to the left. So I ask my learners to think about, what should world language learners know and be able to do? This is our first night of class. And I've set chat stations up around the room. They're all partnered, and they walk to a station and they answer a question before they even look at a standard. And then they lift up a cover page and find the wording of the standard inside that's been named on the cover. And then inside, they're going to find 3 more questions that really help them analyze the content that they're looking at. And I have them move around to 5 stations until they have seen all 5 of the standards and discussed all of them. Then we later on come back for a whole group discussion. So what you can see here is that we're better together because we're interacting with course concepts collaboratively. And we continue on. Nope, I only had one there. We continue on with that same idea, except that the New York State Learning Standards for World Languages imply what teachers should know and be able to do. And so one of the gifts of my classroom is that I've got boards all over every wall, and everybody has a marker and they get to go to their boards at any given time. So they're again with a partner, and they have one of the boards and they have their expo marker and they're standing in front of it and they're talking with one another, brainstorming. What should world language teachers know and be able to do based on what we know the standards are telling us? And then they write on the board the ideas that they come up with. And after a given period of time, we turn the room into a gallery walk. So they go around and move from one board to the next, comparing their thinking with what their classmates come up with. Then we have the opportunity to see what they came up with in common, to talk about its relationship to what the standards say learners must be able to do, what it means for them. So here we see we're better together because we're interacting with those course concepts collaboratively, but we're also engaging in that processing through the use of reflection. And we're going to take one more peek, and we're building that conceptual understanding, but this time that the New York State Learning Standards for World Languages, in essence, identify what learners and teachers should know and be able to do. And one of the tasks I have them do is read this wonderful article by Rebecca Bluewolf called Going Deep with Novice Learners. And it's about designing a standards-based unit of instruction around authentic resources that moves teaching and education unit from being topical to thematic. And I have them read this independently at home for homework between our first and second class. And that graphic organizer has a place for each of our 5 standards. So I ask them to fill in what they observed the teacher and the learner do in relationship to each of our 5 standards. And the final section is their reflections on this. So what's going on here? We're better together because we've again interacted with these course concepts collaboratively. So not only have they read it alone and filled in their graphic organizers, but when they come back to class, they have the opportunity to share what they found with a partner, comparing, contrasting their evidence. And they're reflecting on what does it look like for the standards to be put into action in this unit plan. And depth over breadth, because you'll notice I didn't just say, oh, here are the standards, but we went through them over and over and over again, from thinking about what they mean to what it means for them as teachers, what it means for the learners, and what it looks like in action. And I do a lot more than that, but I will conclude this conceptual understanding with these 3 examples. So the next conceptual understanding that I want to take a look at is facilitating target language comprehensibility, and that it requires specific instructional moves. And those of you who are familiar with the high leverage teaching practices know that facilitating target language comprehensibility is high leverage teaching practice number 1. And so again, the idea of seeing it in action. I love the Annenberg Media videos, and there's a kindergarten teacher teaching all in French, and he is using what are referred to as these small grain instructional moves to make his French comprehensible to these learners. And so my students watch this video, they do it at home, and they've got a checklist of all of those little instructional moves, and they note not only what they saw, but also their reflections. They come back to class after having viewed this, and they share out what they observed. So this is the practice, and this is what he did, and what their reflections are. So they're having this opportunity to process the concept through the use of multimodal modeling and reflection. Continuing with the idea of facilitating target language comprehensibility requiring specific moves, it's one thing to see it in action, but it's a whole nother thing to do it. You might have noticed the list was kind of long. So what I did was I turned that longer list into a bit of a shorter list, and then we played bingo in my methods class. Groups of 4, we had a caller who had to attempt to apply just these small grain practices as they described an image, because this was image bingo, to 2 players who had to listen to the French, but they were studying Spanish, so they really had to make meaning of it, and then mark that image on their bingo board. And in the meantime, there was a 4th person who was an observer, who was using that checklist to identify which moves the caller was using and then give them feedback. And we had the opportunity to do this across languages and to switch roles. And so what was in play was, of course, we're better together because we were enacting the course concepts collaboratively and processing through the peer feedback processes, and depth over breadth because we were engaged in that experiential learning. But I mentioned to you that there were more of those instructional moves than could realistically be practiced the first time through, so we did it again. This time I brought in wordless picture books and put my students in groups. We had a storyteller, we had story listener, and we had a feedback provider. And they were looking for the use of those various instructional moves. You see the two books here that my students had the opportunity to choose from. And you have a chance to see my students in action as they were reading stories to one another. And again, we can see how the 3 points are in action. We're better together by interacting, enacting course concepts collaboratively. We've got processing through peer feedback processes and depth over breadth because we are engaged in both experiential learning, but we're revisiting the core concepts again. So let me show you a third conceptual understanding, which is that a thematic unit plan context is established through meaningful topic integration. So those thematic thinking cards, which are the little cards that we created from the themes and topics in the New York State World Language Themes and Topics document, are perfect for manipulating to start designing the thematic unit title and context. So I put together 3 cards and then I told my students, what if this particular card, which in this case is leisure, along with communities and neighborhood and physical environment, climate, weather, and geography. What if leisure is the anchor topic? What might this look like? Well, I gave them this example of my unit theme might be, what's there to do around here? A question certainly relevant to our students who often say, there's nothing to do around here. And then I rolled out what it might look like, prefacing our language functions in context. But I wanted them to understand that just doing it once won't help you really know how you can manipulate these cards to come up with a unit theme. So I gave them another example. Same 3 cards, but wait a minute. Let's make the anchor topic the physical environment, climate, weather, and geography. And all of a sudden, this very same set of topics interact differently to come up with my unit theme of the wonders of nature. And again, I model this with the language functions in context, which later on will become can-do statements. So we're creating class models because I started by doing this, and as you'll see on the next slide, they had to add on to it. And we process this through multi-step modeling and depth over breadth because we are revisiting core concepts and resources. So here you're going to see that very same thing, except being done by my learners. I had them pick 3 to 4 of the topic cards and then brainstorm what those would look like if they were integrated to come up with a meaningful context. So we can see a couple of their examples. A little bit messy, but they were really very thoughtful. And again, we have boards all over the room we can write on, so that's what those are photos of. And we have La Vie Rose and Home Away from Home. So again, they got the idea of that meaningful unit theme. So we're better together by enacting course concepts collaboratively, creating resource sets. We processed with drafting and peer feedback and depth over breadth with that experiential learning. And on this last slide, I simply want to show you 2 of the ways that my learners did engage in peer feedback as well as self-assessment. I have a document that is a unit plan self-assessment checklist, so they can check off but they can also give themselves some feedback. Or when they came to class with their own unit theme developed for the next class, I had a slide that told them, check, 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 and they did this with peer. So we continue to see that processing matters through peer feedback and self-assessment, depth and breadth through revisitation of core concepts and resources. And my very last example is that world language teachers can benefit from membership in a professional learning community. What you see over to the side is part one of the Administrator Reference Guide that very clearly identifies the role that professional organizations can play in supporting our teachers' learning as they are coming to know the standards, as well as time together with peers in a professional learning community. And so I started with NYSAFLT, our New York State World Language Association, and had my learners each take one of, or actually they worked with a partner, each took one of the tabs on the NYSAFLT website and summarized what it said that NYSAFLT had to offer. That familiarized them with coming to know what professional organization websites look like and what kind of information to look for. So we did this as a class. We created a class model. It was multi-step modeling and experiential learning. So now that they knew how to do that together, I had them go do the very same sort of thing for a range of professional organizations. ACTFL, AATF, AATSP, LECNI, which is specific to Central New York. And they did their research. They came up with the top 3 ideas, top 3 reasons for membership. I scanned these documents and made them available to everyone. So clearly, we had a class resource set. So that takes us to the Better Together. The processing happened through research and drafting, and we continued to revisit the core concepts. And finally, once my students joined a professional organization, they also attended an event and they had to write a report about it. And I love what the student wrote. On Saturday, September 27th, I attended the LECNI Regional Conference. Moving on to the second paragraph. Reflecting on this experience, I am very grateful that I had the opportunity to attend. It was really inspiring to see how much passion and energy world language teachers bring to their work. It also reminded me of why I want to teach languages, because it is about so much more than teaching grammar and vocabulary. It is about connecting students with real cultures and people. Professionally, I gained strategies that I can bring into my future classroom, from designing units around authentic resources to creating assessments that truly measure communication. This conference also made me realize how important it is to stay involved with organizations like LECNI, not only for the new ideas, but also for the support of a community that understands the challenges of teaching world languages. Overall, this event gave me both inspiration and practical tools, and it made me excited to keep learning and growing as a future teacher. We are better together by participating in world language profession and through depth over breadth through our experiential learning. So thank you for listening to me. I am now going to turn it over to Bill.
Thanks, Joanne. So over time, the methods course has generally followed this sequence for me. You see how I divided up into 2 quarters. Most of the first quarter is devoted to building a content-specific language knowledge base, what I call learning the language of language teaching. Then we take a close look at strategies to enact lesson sequences for each of the standards. And then finally, we take a look at applying those skills of effective teaching as the teacher candidates work on their unit plan projects. So Geneseo is very similar to the undergraduate program at Oswego. They take their World Language Methods course in the semester prior to student teaching. Now we offer it in the fall semester. The students enter the methods block having courses in foundations, addressing the needs of all learners, literacy for secondary learners, and dimensions of teaching secondary. And then in the method semesters, concurrently, they take a course called Topics in Secondary Education World Languages, which I also teach, which is nice because I can kind of relate the two. And then they do a practicum in a world language classroom in the area. Now, Joanne applied the critical lens of developing conceptual understandings to look at the methods course. I'm going to look at 2 lesson sequences from my course through the content-focused critical lens. Each session focuses on what the teachers need to know, to do, and how they need to be. In other words, their knowledge of the language of language teaching, their skill set, thinking and acting like a language teacher, and their dispositions, which include things like beliefs, values, and attitudes. As they develop their knowledge base, the teacher candidates develop skills they develop their content-specific knowledge base in order to effectively enact the standards. To do this, they maximize the use of class time for collaboration using a flipped classroom model. I model teaching strategies for language learning to help teacher candidates develop the language of language teaching. I model the gradual release of responsibility model. And I orient teacher candidates to foundational documents through reflective interaction. As they develop this knowledge base, the teacher candidates develop skills that enable them to create lesson sequences appropriate to the proficiency target of the classes they will teach. To do this, we will use real-world scenarios posted by other classroom teachers in social media forums to stimulate critical thinking and problem-solving strategies. We'll analyze videos of teaching episodes to identify teaching and classroom management practices while modeling interpretive communication and engagement strategies. And we'll apply strategies studied through scaffolded tasks to create lesson sequences and instructional materials. That's how we'll learn the skills. And then aside from knowledge and skills, an effective teacher must be able to establish positive relationships with students and colleagues. The methods course can help teachers candidates hold up a mirror to the beliefs, values, and attitudes that they already bring to class, what we refer to again as the dispositions, to consider what their emerging professional identity is going to look like. So we do things like develop, articulate, and enact a set of principles rooted in current research, foundational documents, and professional values of accessibility, equity, inclusion, and fairness to all. We develop and practice skills of collaboration and collegial practice and interaction right in the methods class. And we engage in individual and collaborative reflection, self-evaluation, and analysis of feedback to identify personal assets and areas for growth. So let's take a look at 2 lesson sequences. The first one is the lesson sequence I use in teaching my candidates how to write can-do statements for learning targets. So in doing this, they need to know the performance indicators and the standards, and they need to know what language functions are, which they've had in prior lessons that we call back to, and then we develop further in this lesson sequence. What they will do in this lesson sequence is write can-do statements, and they'll also get some practice identifying acceptable evidence. And the dispositions we practice are how to be culturally responsive in terms of selecting instructional materials, making their lessons inclusive and accessible, and working in a team-oriented collaborative way. So I draw upon their prior learning experiences between standards and proficiency targets. The teacher candidates work in pairs to correctly sort and sequence the performance indicators by standard and proficiency target. In this task, they develop a deep understanding of the performance indicators in terms of developing their professional identity. So they review the performance indicators And then they develop teamwork and collaboration skills working together. Now, throughout the course, you'll notice that both Joanne and I model strategies for our students so that they can experience as learners what we want them to do with their students, and they can incorporate them into their own lesson. In this lesson, I model the use of manipulatives to promote active learning. So even before COVID, I used the flipped classroom model to provide content knowledge as part of class preparation in order to free up the class period for lots of active learning and collaborative tasks. So the students always received an outline of the video, including the key terms spelled correctly. And then the students would complete a self-check quiz at the end of the video. And then in the next class, I'd begin with a short multiple choice or short answer completion check, comprehension check, which would be on our learning management system. This video develops background knowledge about language functions and learning targets. And again, it models the strategies for using flipped classroom, but also for interpreting video content. Now, in class, I often begin by drawing on the students' life experiences or their experiences as a learner. And in this class, we brainstorm a list of all the ways that students use their first language to communicate during a normal week. And we have some examples here. Again, this gives them familiarity of what language functions are. And again, I'm modeling the ways to use the student's life experience as an asset to learning. Now, once we brainstorm these examples, then we look at our lists and we think, okay, what does this suggest as a relevant and ideal content for the language curriculum? And what would be a good operational definition for authentic communicative context? And what would be a good operational definition for language functions? Again, we're developing the skill of thinking like a language teacher thinks. And I'm modeling on how to help students develop higher order thinking skills by developing operational definitions. Now, before having developed the background knowledge, I'm ready to introduce the language function document that we'll be using in writing can-do statements. So you and your partner will draw a card from one of the content topics. I used, again, those topic cards that Joanne used in her class. And using the language function verb sheet, consider what interpersonal and presentational language functions might be carried out in communication tasks connected to the topic. So again, we're deepening their knowledge of language functions and helping them to think like a teacher. But before launching into writing learning targets, sometimes I have to engage in some unteaching. By this time, my students have been taught to write traditional content subject objectives, and they know all about Bloom. But I have to show them that those objectives don't work as learning targets for language proficiency. And I use this chart from the Administrator Reference Guide to contrast their prior learning with what they are now learning about can-do statements. So they learn what can-do statements should look like and how to think like a language teacher. But before I turn them loose to write their own can-do statements, we study some non-examples and then rewrite them following the correct pattern for writing can-do statements using language functions. And I get some of these examples right from textbooks and other online lesson plans that I've found in various places. So this brief activity models the notion of scaffolding. They get to think like a language teacher, engage in some reflective practice, and see how they're being scaffolded so that then I could turn them loose to write their own can-do statements. So finally, I have them work in pairs or triads. You're planning a unit for 8th graders. I give them a scenario to write proficiency targets for Novice High, and they've decided to develop a thematic unit on hometown pride. They work with their partner to write can-do statements that are aligned to Novice High, and then they identify one form of acceptable evidence for each can-do statement, and then they record their can-do statements on poster paper. Here they are writing can-do statements and working collaboratively. Then we put their poster papers on the wall. Each group will also need to take Post-it notes and a pen with them. Facing the wall, they move to the right. They read over the can-do statements on the poster that the other group writes and use Post-it notes to leave feedback. And they can put comments, questions, or suggestions related to, and I project this so that they know what kind of feedback to leave on the choice of language function, the alignment of the language function with the acceptable evidence, unclear, vague, or student-unfriendly wording, and possible alternative wording suggestions that they have. And again, they are engaged in self-evaluation and also in giving feedback and receiving feedback as well. So in our second scenario, we're going to talk about designing interpretive lessons aligned with Standard 1 using authentic resources. Again, we start off with, we will draw on their knowledge of performance indicators, language functions, and authentic resources. What they will do is they will be able to locate authentic resources, design an interpretive lesson sequence, and apply gradual release of responsibility in their lesson plan. And then they'll create authentic, culturally responsive contexts and be able to attend to inclusion and representation. So for this lesson sequence, I start out again with a flipped video, and they learn about authentic resources and the elements of an interpretive lesson. Then I orient them to two different documents we'll use in this lesson series. The first one is about authentic resources, and to do that, I have them, before they look at the document, I pose this question: what are the characteristics of a good authentic resource? Drawing on what they learned in the video. And then the students work in groups of 2 or 3 to develop some criteria. Then they walk around the room looking at 6 to 8 different authentic resources I placed around the room and apply their criteria to see if it's a good authentic resource. Then they can make revisions to their criteria. And then I hand out the document, and students compare their criteria to those on page 2 of the document. And in this way, we're modeling, giving them experience to think like a language teacher, and I'm modeling the technique or the strategy of using a gallery walk. Then we get to, again, providing some scaffolding and some interpretive viewing tasks. I show a short 15-minute video in which this practitioner gives us an idea of her selection and sequencing of authentic resources in a unit on food. French teachers will recognize the great Catherine Wasselin from the state of Washington, and she is a wonderful expert on using authentic resources, and her video is great. Again, giving them showing how a language teacher thinks by having a language teacher talk her way through her thinking. And then again, she also talks about the different representation, the different cultural representation. And I can model interpretive viewing strategies on how to do pre and post viewing and so forth. Then we orient the teacher candidates to the second foundational document, the pre, during, and post strategy document. And so I have them actually read through the document. I give them a hard copy, and they code it as follows. They put a check mark by the strategies they've observed or experienced. They plus those that they've heard of but not used. They put a question mark by unfamiliar ones. They put a star by ones they'd like to try. And then then we share. They share one strategy that they found very effective, either as a teacher or as a learner, and they name one strategy they'd like to try or learn more about. So again, it gives them an opportunity to orient themselves to the document itself, and it models a during reading strategy of coding the document. Then I start to scaffold for them the gradual release of responsibility by showing them a model lesson, the I do part of it. So I give them a performance indicator and I give them a model can-do statement, and then I take them through the sequence of tasks that I would include in this this lesson on interpreting an authentic video about the Paris Olympics in French. And then I summarize that lesson, showing how I've taken the tasks from the document, for pre, during, and post, and why I've selected those tasks, what purpose I was using in selecting each of those tasks. Then I give them an authentic resource. I have one in French and one in Spanish, and they work with a partner to create a can-do statement. They propose a before, during, and after reading task for interpret that document. They identify other modes of communication that are embedded in the tasks that they've selected. They can use interpersonal or presentational mode to as during and post tasks. And this allows them to select the strategies and write can-do statements, and it models the we-do phase of the gradual release of responsibility. Then they put their tasks up on a Google slide deck. They present their findings to the class, and then they can receive and offer feedback on the slides on their lesson choices with classmates. So by this activity or this part of the lesson sequence, they again continue to think like a language teacher, and then they have an opportunity to receive some peer feedback. Again, since they're doing the same documents and they've reflected on the same documents, they'll see how they make different choices and different approaches to all of those tasks. Now, Lori will briefly take us out with how to promote ongoing professional development.
Thank you, Bill. So after all of this exposure, this work, this exploration, teachers come to school. And so they are new in the environment, and that goes for teachers who are new to teaching or teachers who are new to a particular school. And so let's take a look at what professional success looks like in the World Language Department once they arrive. So we focus on 3 areas in general: honing effective teaching practices. We also work with teachers to develop rich curricula and materials. And of course, sharing professional expertise. And we've heard a little bit about that already. So starting with honing effective teaching practices, there are several documents that and resources that we can access. So of course, as Joanne mentioned, we have webinars and lots of them, and so many of them are really useful when teachers come to a meeting or they've had an observation, they have a particular question about something specific. My usual answer is there's a webinar for that. And so these resources are really invaluable for teachers, especially new teachers coming into a school. And of course, we have book studies in New York State that can help them as well. Teachers meet regularly. In fact, meetings is kind of the word of the day. They meet in grade level teams, in language specific teams across grade levels to share teaching practices, materials, and to co-plan. And then, of course, there are visits. And one of the most beneficial things that we do in our department is visit each other with some good frequency. So visiting classes and having collegial, non-supervisory conversations after the observation to share ideas. The World Language Lesson Observation Guide has been very helpful. That is something that both observer and observee can have to help guide their conversations. In developing rich curriculum materials, many teachers do this for the first time coming into schools after having some methods and exploring that and doing their student teaching. Now they're creating materials and lessons for their classes. And so designing lessons and thematic units using templates, these are New York State templates for lesson planning and unit planning, helps get the whole team literally on the same page. This resource, Writing Quality Assessments, has been invaluable for teachers as they design assessments, both formative and summative assessments in the World Language classroom. And of course, master rubrics. And again, these are the New York State master rubrics. There are single point rubrics, which are my favorite, 2-point, 3-point, however you'd like to work with them. But there are templates for you to include all of the different proficiency levels depending on your course. So these are really a great support to new and veteran teachers. we also have not just the class to look at, but the course in general and where it fits with other courses. So evaluating the current curricula, sometimes teachers come in and inherit a curriculum. And so evaluating that curriculum and the materials with a course level curriculum audit can be helpful. And then how does this course fit in with the rest of the courses being offered on the school? So establishing those connections between courses in line with an articulated scope and sequence. And this document, the course level curriculum framework, helps in doing that work. And then finally, as you've already heard, sharing professional expertise, both within the school and outside of the school. So advocating for your language program is very important. Having teachers share resources with school leaders who may not have a background in language education. So the administrator reference guide is really important to share with all of the leaders in the school who interact with world language programs. Collaborating in your school with the PLC or professional learning community. And sharing your teacher expertise in department meetings at local, state, regional, and national conferences, as Joanne has shared. And then finally, mentoring and coaching pre-service, new, and of course our veteran teachers. And several documents help with this. This document about how to read standards is a great way to start unpacking the different elements of our standards in New York State. The performance indicators, of course, for each particular course that a teacher might be having throughout the year. And then finally, this document, which many, many teachers have right up on their desk, on the wall in front of their desk, the language function verbs document that helps them write their can-do statements. So these are some ideas that I have from within school once they finish this incredible exposure in the methods course. And we hope that that's provided you with some good ideas or reinforce things that you're already doing. Let's go back to our webinar can-do statements, and hopefully we have accomplished these. I can identify NYSED OBEWL resources to use in the methods class and beyond for developing future and current teachers' knowledge and skills. And I can identify ways to model discipline-specific strategies for developing future and current teachers' knowledge of the standards and skills in applying them. And with that, I think we will open up the chat to questions from all of you. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon.
Thanks, Lori. I'm going to stop the recording while Bill and Joanne start looking at those questions.